everybody. Here is a kind of a quick and a more shortened version of the Burn Your Boats podcast. We wanted to hop in today and have a chat about these absolutely awful wildfires
Yep.
in the Los Angeles, Southern California area. It's from our perspective over here, it's absolutely heartbreaking to see the the pain, the loss, the disruption to people's lives. And we think that we have a little bit to add here on this subject because we live in the Tampa Bay area and we've just kind of endured something very, very similar in we're 5, 6, 7 months on from recovering from hurricanes Milton and Helene,
Oh,
kind of back to back hurricanes that really, really impacted our neighborhood. And so we feel that we've a little bit to add on that. And Clark, I know that you were heavily involved in the cleanup of the hurricanes. And while we're not here to talk about hurricanes, I just got to ask your opinion on these things. And the first thing I'd like to ask you, Clark, is when I went down to the beaches, kind of low lying neighborhoods that are, on the water,
right.
they're mostly pretty affluent neighborhoods. And most of the people there who've bought in the last 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years are affluent. But the people who've been there for 20 or 30 years, they're not. So when we think about, Pacific Palisades or Malibu or Brentwood or any of these neighborhoods that are being very much disrupted right now, and we think about these neighborhoods as being full of, movie stars and,
Right.
very affluent people. But the truth of the matter is most people are not affluent in these neighborhoods. Most people bought their house in 1970, 1980. They brought their kids up there. Affluence has happened around them, but they're not affluent. You'd agree with that, Clark?
Oh, of course. And I think one of the challenges is that we are looking at the media just like everyone else, and they're showing the pictures of the house on the side of the cliff, and it's burned to nothing. And that's kind of all they show. And you'll see the neighborhoods inland. But the challenge is, and it's the same thing that we face, David, in our hurricanes here, is that the majority of the people that are impacted are like inland, right? They're people that you're not going to necessarily see because the house isn't worth like $3.6 million. It was worth $400,000, right? And so it's a very difficult thing to kind of digest as to who was the one that really got impacted the most, because most of the people that got impacted, David, are the ones that least can afford to
That's right.
deal with all these things and float contractor costs and go pay for the hotel room and put your dog with you. And I think that that's something that a lot of times is not being shown as much,
Right.
because you're always seeing the house on the side of the cliff that's worth $6.8 million.
Right. So the first thing to take away there is like everybody needs to have absolute empathy for
Yeah.
these people. Right. There's like, trust me, park your cynicism to the side and say, oh, there's a
Yeah.
bunch of movie stars. Guess what, Clark? Most movie stars that you might know who've done, they're well known for something they did in the 70s or 80s or 90s. They're not wealthy.
Right.
You may know them. You may know their names. They may live in Pacific Palisades, as an example, but they're not wealthy.
Yeah.
They're no more able to react and adapt to these things than you and I are. And so I think it's first and foremost, we need to all take a minute and empathize. These aren't all, Mel Gibson and Tom Cruise
Right.
type people, So it's really important to understand that. And it's also important to understand that most people that live in these neighborhoods would not have been able to rebuy their homes a month ago before these horrible fires. They they live there, but they wouldn't be able to buy their house next door if they had to do it again. Their house is appreciated all around them, but most people cannot rebuy that, and they wouldn't even be able to afford the property taxes.
Yeah.
And we see that here in our neighborhoods as well. Now, I know that you're doing developments in different neighborhoods, and as am I, Clark, and we do other things all around the city. It's really, really eye opening to see, even in my neighborhood, how many people who live in my neighborhood would be able to rebuy their homes after 6, 7, 10 years of gentrification. Not very many.
Yeah. And here's the one of the big challenges too, is that being able to understand that your dirt that the house is on, right? Because a lot of those houses are completely burned to the ground, right? If you put a mortgage on it of, $1.5 million, and the dirt is only worth $1 million, you start to come into challenges, right? And that's one of the big things that they're going to see, that we have seen in the last 6 months, is a lot of times the mortgage is worth more than what the actual lot is worth. And that's put a lot of strain on a lot of the people that are going through already tough times, having to move out, having to lose all their, their memorabilia and their photos and all the things that are sentimental to them. And now they have to deal with the fact that potentially their mortgage is worth more than what the land is worth altogether.
Yeah, I'm housing a lot of people from that were impacted or that are rebuilding, and I fortunately happen, very very fortunately, just as timing would have it, happen to have a few doors coming on stream just as the storms hit,
Hmm.
and I was able to house a few people, and my God, there was one family in particular, their house burned and flooded at the same time.
Oh,
Bonkers when you
yeah.
think about it.
Yep.
They didn't even have a toothbrush.
Yeah.
That's where they were starting out. At least with a hurricane, we can, within reason, we can forecast it out 3, 4, 5 days
Right.
at a small window. A bigger window can be 2 to 3 weeks, and so we know what's happening. We can prepare our homes by and large, and it's really, it's the homes directly on the waterfront are impacted. But in this case, some of these people got 10 minutes warning, 5 minutes warning, like
Right.
literally the wind has changed, it's coming a different direction, and you got to go right now. They were telling people to reverse their car into their driveway, so that, because those seconds that it might take for you to back your car out could be the difference between life and death. Absolutely scary. And
Wow.
I would like to say, anybody who stayed in their home to fight a fire, never do that. Your
Yeah.
life is just never, ever, ever worth bricks and
Leaving your house.
mortar.
Yeah.
Everything can be replaced, and that's something that I've been really hurt to see, that some people have died staying in their homes. But look, let's get into the reality. That's why we want to record this real quick. The victims here are going to fall financially into two categories. They're going to be fairly wealthy, or they're not going to be wealthy at all, even though they live in the same neighborhoods. And those are going to fall into, let's take the not so wealthy people. They're going to fall into two categories as well. They're going to fall into the category where they've lived in a home since 1978. The home's been paid off for 20 years. Insurance has been rising. They're like, I'm just not going to get insurance. They don't have insurance, right? And to your point about lot value, those people, the people who can least afford, to build back new, fall into two categories: the ones who are insured and the ones who are not insured. And they both have two different options on their hands. The uninsured people still have their lot, they still have their lot value. I'm going to talk about further on in a couple of minutes. We're going to talk about how to establish what that is and how to understand it, and what the other issues may be. But for right now, they still have their lot. And so they've lost the value of their house and the emotional possessions that they have. That's what they've lost, the physical building, but the dirt is unchanged in terms of its value, right? And then you have the insured people, right? And they have got a slightly different option. And we've seen this a lot here. So immediately after the storm, the people who were uninsured, and they were the fastest to turn around and immediately list their lot for sale. They're just like, we can't rebuild.
Right.
We don't have the money to rebuild. If we do rebuild, they're going to make us build to the newest standards. They're going to make us, they're going to require us to build outside the flood zone. They're going to require us to elevate our homes. We don't have that money. We're going to sell our lot. And within a week or two, there was like pretty much a couple of thousand lots for sale in and around the neighborhood. And so they were the people who, they've been housed by FEMA. FEMA are giving them grants to stay in Airbnbs and whatnot. So at least FEMA's there to help out with their immediate home needs. But Clark, we saw a lot of people who are not insured immediately list their lots for sale. And I remember you and I trying to, what are these lots even worth? And we're going to talk about why we were asking that question in a minute. But then, Clark, you've got the people who were insured. They've got different options, different scenarios. Walk me through what the people who did have insurance But they've got two options: do they rebuild or not? And walk me through that little conundrum that a lot of people here in the Tampa Bay area experience. They were flooded, they were insured, and they have options. What are their options?
So I think one of the stark differences between the wildfires out west and the hurricanes east is that with the flood, it was a FEMA flood policy up to 300K. So if your house was $10 million or it was 15 cents, you still only got up to 300K. So the higher value of your property, the challenge was that 300K wasn't necessarily going to cover all of the damages. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. The difference is, and this is the thing I don't know, I'd be interesting to see your take, David, is if you get the fire damage, right? I believe that should be able to at least take care of your mortgage, regardless of there's not like a limit in terms of what it will pay up to, right? And I think that's a key difference between it, is that at least hopefully it'll pay your mortgage off so that you're not underwater, no pun intended, because there's a lot of people in our area that are well underwater. They bought their house for 800,000, now it's worth 300,000 because that's what the dirt is worth, and they've got a mortgage of 675,000, but the FEMA flood policy only went up to 300K, and they don't have many good choices right now at all, other than to just short sale it or just give it back to the bank. I'm hoping, David, and what is your thoughts, is if you know further more than I do, is if you have the fire policy, I believe that it will actually take care of your mortgage. So at least you're not going to necessarily walk away with a ton of equity, but at least you're going to not have to walk away with a negative $300,000 mortgage balance and a foreclosure on your hands.
Well, the way it works is that you're talking about the insurability. So let's say you had a house, and so you've got the lot, you've got the house, and you have a mortgage on it. Here is the conundrum a lot of people found themselves in here in the Tampa Bay area. To your point, $630,000 mortgage on a $980,000 house. Let's just use that, right? The lot would recoup somewhere around $400,000 right now on the open market for one of the better. It's up to $1 million if you're directly on the water, even after the storms, even after everything else. There's still lots exchanging hands at $1 million. But let's say on average, the lots in here go anywhere between $300,000 and $400,000. So it's a nice lot, it's corner lot, blah, 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 blah. So the valuation of their lot is $400,000, and it would cost them about $400,000 to rebuild a house. So in this scenario, they're definitely out. They're definitely out of pocket. But if they were to rebuild, the rebuilt house would be worth $1.2, $1.3 million, right? And so the first things first, the owners of that particular home, the insurance company will stroke them a check for $400,000 for the build cost, right? But they're not getting a check to their bank account. The lender is getting a check to their bank account. So the first $400,000 in this scenario is the insurance company paying to rebuild a house. And the second portion of the payoff is this person decides to sell their lot for $400,000. So they get a lot sale for 400. They get an insurance check for 400. They owe 630. They walk away with $170,000, and that's what their options are. And so we're going to see a huge amount of that. If you owed nothing, your house was worth, let's say, 920. You get 400 from your insurance and 400 for the sale of your lot. You're up to $800,000. You're still out a bit. They're not going to give you the equity. You're still out a little bit, but by and large, you walk away with $800,000. But it's a great question. If there's a mortgage there, that mortgage is paying back first time. Now, if the value of the lot in the house is below that of the mortgage, then I quite frankly, I don't know what that scenario is. Is it a short sale situation? What are you short selling? I do know this. In the scenario where there's a mortgage, there was definitely insurance. So thank goodness for that. So in many cases, that mortgage has saved their bacon.
Yeah.
The fact that they were required to carry an insurance policy is really important. But the real reality is that some people, Clark, will decide to rebuild, because remember, you're not rebuilding the same house. You're not very few people live in a 1,550 square foot house, and they're going to rebuild a 1,550 square house on $1 million lot.
Right.
they're going to opt to do something different. And not everybody can afford to do that. And we've seen this a lot. And so you're going to see a lot of people take the lot value, take the insured value, and walk away. We're going to see that a lot, right? They're going to move to a different state. They're going to move to a different neighborhood. And then you're going to see the more affluent people make the decision to rebuild on their lot and rebuild another house, because the bottom line is the less affluent people would not be able to afford the taxes on their new house. You'd agree with that, right? We see that a lot here. Is it's like, I won't be able to afford the new property taxes on a newly built home. I'm retired. I can't afford, $50,000 a year in property taxes, right? So we're going to see a lot of churn in the market, for better, for worse. And unfortunately, these neighborhoods, the people who can afford to stay, the people who can afford to have insurance, they can afford to rebuild, they can afford their new reset property taxes 5 years from now, it's going to be affluent. The people who are going to sell their lots are going to sell their lots to pretty affluent people who were, quite frankly, couldn't get into these neighborhoods prior to this, and they're going to be able to get in now. And sadly, that's what we see here in the in the aftermath of Helene. And there were, at least we just had floods. People can repair a flood, and some less affluent people can stay for sure. A lot of people do decide to move on, but a lot of people can. They can, they take out the drywall, take out this, that, and the other, and they rebuild, and off they go. You don't have to be a billionaire to do that. But in the case of a catastrophic fire, like, there's not much left. There's not much rebuilding you can do. And so, unfortunately, a lot of people, Clark, are going to walk away from these neighborhoods. And people, the original residents, to people who've been here, people who make it a community, people who use the library. You know what I mean? These people are going to probably end up moving on, and the more affluent people are going to be the ones buying these new lots. But Clark, I want to ask you a question. Something that we saw right after the storms, I mean, the next week or two, was some people reacted really emotionally, really quickly, and some people were quite stoic about it. It's just stuff. I'm going to wait and see. I'm going to learn. I want to ask you a question, because we can hopefully give some advice to people who are listening, possibly. In that, my advice is that it takes a couple of months for price discovery to really happen on these lots. What are the lots really worth? What does it cost? What are permitting fees? What are architect fees? What is my insurance going to pay me? What are the impact fees? How long is it going to take to get my drawings done? How long is it going to take me to rebuild? What are construction costs? There's a lot of learning to do to really know. And so if you act emotionally, you're probably going to end up giving some value away. What say you, Clark, on that?
Yeah, exactly. We're kind of like 6 months in the future. We've been living this last 6 months. And if I could go back in time to after the hurricane, and if I got flooded, if I wasn't going to rebuild the house, I would immediately put it up for sale immediately the next day. So if you're in California and you were unfortunately impacted by this, and you don't have the means to go through a 2.5 year process to rebuild the funds, the architect drawings, all the things, the permitting process, which is going to be hugely backed up, put it on the market right now, because it's going to take probably 30 to 60 to 90 days before there's any dust that starts settling, because we don't know exactly how much the land is worth. Is it worth what it was worth yesterday before the fire? Is it worth the same amount? Is it worth less? Is it worth more? More than likely, it's going to drop, because there's just going to be a flood of lots that are going to come on the market, right? So if you can be first to market, there's a better chance that you might be able to get more, just because of the uncertainty that people don't understand how much a lot that's been burned after a fire that happened 2 days ago is worth. And you may be able to get some people that are going to come in that are hungry investors. So my one piece of advice, David, is if you don't feel like, I understand it's sad and it's emotional, but we're kind of a financial podcast, right? We want to make sure that you can squeeze as much juice out of that lemon as you can. You have to take action. You have to put it on the MLS yesterday. Go find your favorite realtor, put it up there, and you're going to ask, well, what do I put it at? Well, I'd probably put it at whatever the lot was selling for before, maybe a little bit cheaper in terms of comps in the area, and do it today. Don't wait, because if you're going to dive into it and really try and fully understand, if you're on the fringe of maybe building, then okay, maybe you don't have a choice. But if you know that you don't have an extra access to a $1.2 million to build this new house on, you've got to act quickly, because what's going to happen is there's going to be so much inventory being pushed onto the market that now you're going to be one of 58 lots in a neighborhood that and how do you differentiate yourself? You're just a piece of dirt, right? You're either on the corner or you're not. They're all going to be similar size. So please act as soon as you can, David, unless you feel like you're within a 10 or 15% range of maybe building.
I think I'm going to disagree with some part and agree with some part of what you just said. There's certain neighborhoods, as I say, Malibu and Pacific Palisades. No matter how many lots there are for sale, they're going to be absorbed. There's just so much demand. There's so little supply. And so stepping back for a minute and letting the dust settle and figuring out what that price discovery is. But there are certain neighborhoods that are more middle class and working class that have been deeply impacted. I believe the town of Altadena has been burned to the ground as well. And that's not where the movie stars are. And it's not
Right.
where the wealthy, affluent, uber famous people are living and hanging out. And I think I think your advice might be a little bit more well received in those kind of neighborhoods.
Yeah.
I want everyone to understand, if you've been impacted by this in your house, know that the permitting department in your town is going to get so jammed up. You're not going to get anything through permitting. The kind of permitting, like from a catastrophic full damage to a house, it's the permitting department is just going to be so backed up for months, if not years. Contractors are going to be backed up. They're going to have contractors are going to have a field day with their bids. And as much as we all dislike it, your contractors are not going to come in and start doing favors for you. They're going to have more work than they could possibly shake a stick at. And so if you are thinking about rebuilding, and that's a real thing, go get your architect today. Start engaging with your architect, start engaging with your contractor before they are absolutely backed up for years, quite frankly, for
Yeah.
years in advance. And so just know that no matter how hard you try and push this new rebuild and this new life up the hill, it's going to take a very long time. So I think first things first, it seems very obvious, but like, get yourself settled, find yourself a nice rental, find yourself somewhere to settle down, buy your toothbrush, get some new clothes, stuff is just stuff. We have been buying houses in foreclosure auctions for many, many years. And we can see that at the end of life, stuff is just stuff. What matters most is that you're safe. You'll regain, obviously, old memorabilia and mementos, and there's things you're going to have lost. But what's lost is gone. What milk is spilt. The most stoic people are the people who just like, it's just stuff. I'm going to move forward and just try do yourself a favor and see it as just stuff. But I would say take some time. So that's where I differ with Clark. I would say take a minute. Nobody really knows what the lots are worth just yet. Nobody really knows what the cost of construction is just yet. Nobody really knows what the city are going to do yet. There's going to be, at the moment, they're still trying to put the fires out, but the fires will be out next week. And there's going to be a lot of questions that need to be answered. And so, I would say, in hindsight, looking at these neighborhoods, if you cannot afford to play this game, I would agree with Clark. Sell your lot, move on, restart. And I've seen a lot of people do that here. And they're pretty stoic about it. Just like, that happened. I'm good. Just know that your insurance will kick in if you have it. I would say the very, very first thing, get your insurance adjuster immediately. Call your insurance adjuster 50 times a day and get them out there. We had, me personally, I had a roof replacement, and the insurance were kind of messing around with us for a minute. Get some professionals in there to have a conversation with the insurance companies. If you're in that category that just rebuilding, is just not an option for you, just bounce back as fast as you can, move to a new neighborhood, start your life over. But we wanted to touch this because when we look at the neighborhoods that were most impacted in our world, we're still fairly new to it. They do bounce back. There's things that bounce back fairly quickly. The neighborhood will bounce back. Have faith in that. Know that, a year or two from now, little coffee shops will start springing back open. Restaurants will start opening again. Not everywhere is burned. There's a lot of other, good things around. The community, the beautiful coming together of a community, the tightness of seeing the community help each other. It's really heartwarming. Like, it's really, really lovely to see that. And so I would say, Clark, unfortunately, all the beautiful waterfront neighborhoods, they're just getting more affluent. That's who's buying down there. That's who's snapping up those $1 million waterfront lots. People who are from out of town. They didn't go through the storm. They're just going to buy that lot because now they can get it, because it wasn't for sale before. But in hindsight, people bounce back. It's very normalized here. Would you say that the storms are something that people even talk about or think about anymore?
Not unless still staying in some hotel somewhere with the two kids and the dog. But other than that, if you just drive around, it looks the same. Obviously, it's going to be different out in the fires because there's nothing left, right? One of the things I want to add before we hop off is I was able to. I probably took about 100K worth of damage across 5 or 6 rentals. I did apply through the SBA for a disaster relief loan, David, and I was able to basically go through each property and say, hey, I had 8 grand worth of damage here and 12 grand here and 3 grand here. And they basically took me through a process. It was your typical process going through the SBA and through any government program where it's not fun. It's kind of nails on a chalkboard. But at the end of the day, it took me about 60 or 70 days to get through it. And they did approve me for a $70,000 loan, 4%, 15 years. So that was something that was nice, right? I can't go out and get 4% money anywhere. And again, I don't have a crystal ball as to if there's going to be funds or what those funds are going to look like or what the process. But if you're listening to this and you've been impacted, I don't even care if it's a rental property or it's a main property. Go Google SBA, Small Business Administration Disaster Relief Fund. See if you qualify for it and apply yesterday. Again, the same thing. Apply as quickly as you can because you get in line, right? And then what they'll do is they'll cut off the funding after a certain point. And then if you're not, in the system, then you're not going to have access to it. I appreciate what you're saying. I'm glad we kind of disagree a little bit because there's different ways where we're all kind of pontificating as to what's the best way to deal with the market and all the supply that's going to hit. But I still stand by acting very, very quickly and quickly being able to ask yourself a question. Do I have the means to rebuild this at, whatever the cost is? Do I have access to loans to be able to rebuild a $350 square foot type property out in Los Angeles, whatever that may be? And if the answer is a hard no, then I think you need to act. I think you need to get on with the SBA as quickly as possible. Get with FEMA, see if FEMA has some grant programs. The quicker you act, because the slower you act, there's just going to be so many people coming into these programs, and you might be left standing up when the music stops.
I think that's great advice. SBA loans are there for landlords, anybody who owns multifamily, anybody who has a business that's impacted. That's what the SBA is there for. And I know that we also made some low cost loan applications as well. FEMA is there to help you with your house. So if you're a homeowner and you don't have business losses, you don't own a business, you don't own a commercial building, you don't own rental properties, FEMA is where you need to get going. And I couldn't agree with Clark more on this one. It's like, get in line. Get in line, right? The sooner you start making those applications, the sooner you're going to see some light at the end of the tunnel. Because one of the downsides of owning rental properties in an environment where these kind of things are going to happen is nobody cares about your rental property. The only people who care about helping you there is the Small Business Association.
Yeah.
Right. So SBA loan. Clark, I'm really glad you said that. But look, we're going to wrap up here. I will say this. If you are an investor, there is unfortunately going to be some opportunities to buy lots from people who cannot afford or do not want to rebuild. If you are a person who has been impacted by this, to the point we just made, get on with the SBA, get on with FEMA, get on with your insurer, because there's a lot of people coming up behind you, right? That's for sure. If you are a developer, get going. Start understanding what the price is. Do not take advantage of anybody. If you are a general contractor, if you are listening to this and you're around the United States and you are a demo person, or you are an electrician, or you have a skill or a trade, please make your skills available to these people in Southern California. They need your help. They're not all wealthy. They're not all movie stars, and not all movie stars are wealthy. So please, I'm going to go out with that one. Please, if you have a skill or a trade, get out, take a year, make yourself some money, and help these people rebuild. Clark, what say you? We're going to leave.
Yep. Our thoughts are with everyone dealing with these issues. We just wanted to provide a little bit of thoughts as to how to act quickly and how to kind of soften the blow a little bit. I know it's not going to be easy, but hopefully you had a few tools here today that could maybe put a few more dollars in your bank account, make it a little bit less stressful. And with that, David, we thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Burn Your Boats podcast with Clark Lunt and David Shaw. We would love to hear from you. Please reach out at burnyourboatswealth.com with comments, questions, and if you have a topic you would like Clark and David to discuss on an upcoming episode. We would very much appreciate it if you took the time to rate and review Burn Your Boats podcast on your favorite podcast listening app, and make sure to follow and share on social media. Content in Burn Your Boats podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not legal or financial advice. Please review our legal disclaimer at burnyourboatswealth.com. Thank you for listening.